Since 1887, the Stonington Free Library has been a center for knowledge, ideas, creativity, and entertainment. It is a comfortable and welcoming community space for the town of Stonington, Connecticut, where all ages can explore, discover, gather, and learn within a building of distinctive and unique architecture. This video program is an evolution to expand the offerings of the library to share directly in your home or organization. Welcome to the Thoughtful Thursdays speaker series, made available to you by the Stonington Free Library.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Carla Boatinghouse Umland. I'm the Assistant Director of Stonington Free Library. And I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And I want to give special thanks to Kim Larkin for presenting this program and for all the work she's put into it and all the sample kits that she put together for us. Also, thank you to Michaela, the director, and the rest of our staff and volunteers for their support in organizing this event. We are asking participants to keep microphones muted unless you would like to ask a question. That just minimizes the sound disruptions during the program. We are recording the program. Any personal information such as names will be edited before we post the program recording to our YouTube channel. And now a little bit about our presenter. Kim Larkin of Classic Creations has been teaching fun, creative programs to students ages 5 to 75 for 20 years. She has a commercial chocolate business and is a licensed chocolatier, and I can't think of a better job title than that. She holds programs at libraries, schools, retirement communities, women's groups, private functions, and fundraising events in both Connecticut and Massachusetts. Today, we have what she calls a perky pairing, coffee and fine chocolates. We'll explore everything you may want to know about coffee and cacao. Our visual presentation will explore the interesting history, coffee pioneers, how coffee is harvested, roasted, and the best brewing methods. We'll discuss the health benefits of coffee and dark chocolate, and we'll test our Java knowledge with interactive trivia. So Kim, take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. So once again, I just want to mention that I've been a chocolatier for now over 20 years. And many years ago, when my daughters were very little, I had this idea to create chocolate, and I converted my garage into a little Willy Wonka chocolate factory so that when my daughters were sleeping, I made the chocolate. And I worked in my library, I was telling Carla, and that's how my programs came together. I started to compile programs of things that I loved. So it was chocolate and teas and coffee and aromatherapy, and they're all intermingled, as we'll find out. And I am very excited to share what I've learned with you. I hope you find it interesting, and please ask questions as we go along. I'm very comfortable with that. And then we'll have the trivia at the end, and in between we'll be doing our tasting. So you can add your hot water to your coffees now if you'd like. So they're ready to go. And I'll just start on an overview. I could go on for hours, but we'll give you an overview of what I think you'll find interesting. You also got in your kit a little chocolate wheel, a tasting wheel. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of the different descriptors, flavor descriptors, so that when you're tasting the chocolate, you can think about the first impressions you have when we have our little tastings, whether it's spicy or it has a fruit or floral note, if it has a dairy component to it, and what of the senses on the tongue are being stimulated to you: bitter, salty, sweet, sour, and umami. So this is something fun that you can use even if you have a group of friends. You can use this and sort of compare and contrast. Okay, so my bottom on the first slide, the bottom is my contact info. If you have any questions after we end the program, always feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to answer any questions. So we're going to start with a little bit of the history of coffee. And it starts with the legend of Quality in 850 AD. So here's a little picture on the left here of goats, and Quality is the shepherd, and he supposedly was out shepherding his goats, and he found that they were leaping and romping in the fields after chewing on this bush, which had these little red berries. And so, of course, that was the coffee bean, the coffee cherries, as they're known. And then, of course, Caldy chimed in and invited his friends, and the rest is history. It started in Ethiopia. Coffee is the birthplace. Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee, 800 to 900 AD. It's the home of the famed Arabica bean, and it's known for its quality coffee production for over 1100 years now. And 90% of that crop is wild grown. They even have it growing in the forests as well. Coffee is a $100 billion industry. And as of 2020, the census says that 2/3 of that is takeaway. So that's all the coffees we order out, which is pretty amazing. And where is coffee grown? Well, it's grown in a wide variety of places, but it's mostly grown in the bean belt, plus or minus 30 degrees of the equator near the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn. And these are the 5 top producers on the left there. Brazil, the number 2 represents, it grows both Arabica and Robusta bean. Vietnam grows mostly Robusta, 96% of it. Colombia is known for its washed Arabica. And then there's Indonesia that grows both, and Ethiopia, of course, with the Arabica. And on the right here is a little picture of the coffee beans being raked in the sun in Costa Rica. And they do that many times with the cacao bean as well. Both these crops need to have a minimal amount of humidity in order to be processed, 10 to 12%. So they rake it and dry the bean out before it can go into further production. So coffee was brewed as early as 1000 AD in Turkey. The Sufi mystics, or the whirling dervishes, when there's a picture below, I find this so fascinating that they drank coffee to help with endurance and concentration during the religious dance of the Sufi mystics. They also were used, it was also used in active meditation. And Rumi, you may have heard of the Sufi mystic and famous poet Rumi from Turkey. He created this meditation. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a brief history of coffee, just a little bit of an overview, and then we'll have our first tasting. Okay. So firstly, back to 1000 AD, Avicenna, you may have heard of him before. He was a great Persian physician, and he actually is very famous in the world of aromatherapy, and that's something I have a certification in. I love it. And Avicenna actually had written down the medicinal properties of coffee and its aromatic and essential oil benefits. Isn't that amazing? So that was back in 1000 AD. Also in the late 1400s in Yemen, coffee was at the time a very popular drink. And in Turkish Constantinople, which also known as Istanbul, the first coffee shops started proliferating. There was also a very coveted position if you were a Cafete Basha. That was really the first barista. And if you had held that title, you took care of the beans for the sultans and made the royal coffee. And then in the 1570s, coffee made its way to the port in Venice, Italy. And Pope Clement VIII actually decided to bless coffee as a holy drink. And in the early 1600s, the Dutch stole coffee graftings and beans from Yemen. And Captain John Smith was the first to bring coffee to the New World in Jamestown. In the late 1600s, the Dutch went to Indonesia and started the cultivation of the coffee graftings through the port of Java. And then they also took the additional graftings back to the Amsterdam Botanical Gardens and kept the original tree there, which is now known as the noble tree, the first tree. And this, I love this story. In 1670, an Indian Sufi mystic by the name of Baba Budan supposedly stole 7 coffee beans from the port of Mocha in Yemen, and he stowed them in his very long beard. And that was actually punishable by death. If you were caught with active beans, you could be put to death. So many times beans left the port, but they were actually boiled, so they were inert. But he brought the beans back to India and he began cultivation. And then in 1723, there was a French naval lieutenant, Gabriel de Clue. He, against the orders of King Louis, took a grafting on a voyage across to Martinique, and he supposedly fended off pirates and hurricane to start the proliferation of the plantations in Martinique. And within a few years, they had over 18 million plants, which is pretty amazing. So that's a little bit about the brief history thus far. And then I'd like to start with our first tasting. So in your kit, you got 3 1-ounce samples. That's usually what we use for tastings. And the first one is one that I molded, and it is a tempered chocolate. It's the coffee cup. So if you get that ready, we're going to have our coffee cup with our pouch of Decaf Fair Trade organic coffee. So this is the one, this is the Mount Hagen that we're going to add to our coffee mug. Okay, so mine's been poured and I really like this product. So we'll see what you think of this for our pairing. So the first thing that we're going to do is you can take it out of your package, but I want to explain to you that this chocolate, along with being tempered, which means it's a shelf-stable chocolate. This is a Guittard chocolate. So Guittard chocolate is my chocolate of choice. I use it in most of my products and most of my classes. And I just find it has beautiful vanilla notes, and it has a very nice cacao taste on the tongue. It sort of lingers a little bit on the tongue. So this is 68%. So we're a few percentages shy of being in the super healthful range. 68% represents the cacao ratio, and then the remaining, which would be 32%, that's the sugar content. So that's how you can figure out cocoa solids versus sugar content. So when we taste the chocolate, we just want to take a bite, but then let it melt on your tongue a little bit. You want to have it melt on your tongue. And then while it's melting, you can even take your tongue and rub it over the top of the roof of your mouth. So you're coating your whole palate before we taste the coffee. And then we're going to take a sip of coffee and see what you think and what flavor notes. You can look at your wheel and come up with some descriptors, and you can unmute yourself because I want to hear what you think. Okay, so we're going to take a bite right now if everybody's ready, and then take a sip of your coffee and see what you think of the pairing together. Okay, so here we go. Taste the chocolate a little bit. See what flavor notes you got. Now it's melting on my tongue. Okay. So this is a decaf product, so no worries, not the chocolate, but your coffee. So let's hear some of your comments if you wouldn't mind. I'd like to hear what you think, what you taste. Do we have any feedback on our tasting? our pairing.
I'll be brave.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not very good at tasting undernotes, to be honest, but I love how smooth it was. I'm normally not a dark chocolate person, but this was good. And then to wash it with the coffee, or pair it, I should say, it was just a very smooth. That's what comes to mind first.
Great. Well, the tempered chocolate is melts, easily on your tongue. And you've got those cacao notes. So, and the vanilla flavor pairs so nicely with a little bit of the that crisp acidity in this Arabica coffee. So I really like the blending, like you said. And 68% is sort of mid-range chocolate. So get prepared. We do have dark chocolate coming up, but this will prepare our palate because we have the darker decaf espresso. So we're sort of moving our way up. And that's what you want to do when you're pairing anything. And I'm sure you know, whether you do cheeses and, when I sample cheeses at programs, we never overpower one cheese over another. We work our way from mild to strong. So your tongue and your palate can taste the difference, taste the gradation of flavor. And the same with wine, and the same with chocolate as well. So we're starting with the sweetest chocolate at 68, and we're moving our way up so we can tell the different flavor notes. Anybody? Thank you for that. Anybody else? Okay, so we're going to be moving on. So I want to tell you a little bit about how and what the coffee bean looks like. This is a picture below the bright red coffee cherries. The coffee grows on bushes and small trees, and the coffee cherry is actually considered a stone fruit. The pit contains the two seeds or the beans on the left there. So you can see the little illustration. So those are the two coffee beans. There's mucilage and parchment over the bean as well. And cacao is the same way. Cacao has parchment over it too, which I'm going to show you a sample of that in a second. So we have on the left there, the anatomy of the coffee bean. We've got the red cherry, and then we've got the parchment covering. There's the green coffee bean, which is actually loaded with phytonutrients. As you've probably seen in stores, you can get green coffee bean extract in pill form now. It's very nutrient dense. And then that's the roasted bean. Okay. And coffee cherries take 9 months to mature. Similar to cacao, it takes 3 to 4 years for the trees to bear fruit as well. So I just want to show you my sample that I bring to my programs. I hope you can see this. This is my little clay sample. This is about the length of a cacao pod. This is about 18 inches long, and this is split open. It's usually in a husked pod, and they split it with a machete, and these are all the beans. And there are about 50 to 60 beans per pod. And you actually need 10 of these pods totally processed. So 500 beans per 1 pound of processed chocolate. So it's totally labor intensive, cacao is. It's amazing that you need that much, but all these beans have to come out. They have to be cleaned, and the mucilage taken off, everything processed, roasted. So it's very labor intensive, and cacao is hand harvested. So with coffee, there's strip picking versus hand select. And of course, a hand select coffee is a much better product because, it's being selected by an individual that can see when the bean is ready to be harvested. Okay. So next, a little bit about cacao. So we know about how that's similar to cocoa and coffee. So the Mayans, here's a picture of the Olmec Indians first started the cacao plantations, and then they shared their information and their knowledge with the Mayans. And the Mayans drank crushed roasted cacao, which is the beans that are roasted. Once these beans are processed and roasted, they're broken into bits, which are called nibs. So they took the nibs and they steeped them in hot water. And they also added cornmeal to absorb all the cocoa butter that was present in cacao. Is almost half cocoa butter, but the cocoa butter is a natural healthy fat. So they used the cornmeal, which doesn't sound very good, does it? Very gritty, but they used that to absorb the natural fat in the bean. And then they would drink it as a healthful medicinal drink. And what they found out was, of course, we know now that cacao is satiating to the body. It gives us energy. It's loaded with nutrients and phytochemicals. And basically, it kept the doctor away for them. Very healthful drink. So it was known as cacahuate. That's the name they gave it, which translates to bitter liquid. Now, the Mayans shared the information with Montezuma, the Aztec emperor, and Montezuma and his people revered cacao. They kept it in vaults, and Montezuma was reported to have consumed 50 cups of this cacahuate a day. And cacahuate was imbibed by only the male Aztec warriors of the tribe. And Montezuma shared his love of cacao with the explorer Cortez from Spain, who then took it back and shared it with the Spanish monks. They of course didn't like the bitter flavor, but they adapted it to their palate, adding the natural cinnamon and also adding sweetener, sugar. So that was how the beginnings of a drinking chocolate came to be. So we're back to coffee. So Arabica versus Robusta, if you are into knowing the different types of beans, these are the two major beans, but there are various species. But Arabica is known to be a higher grown or is a higher grown bean. And this is similar to the information in the tea program that I do, because tea that's grown at a higher altitude, it has the sun during the day and it's cooler at night. So it's more of a balanced, richer tea. The same thing with coffee, the Arabica, it's higher grown. So the bean is balanced. It has higher acidity and it has a greater flavor profile as well. It's considered to be a better cup of coffee. Robusta is a low grown bean and it's higher in caffeine. It almost has double the amount of caffeine and it has a harder flavor and it's more bitter. And coffee, we were talking about before when we saw them raking the beans, coffee is also dried on drying patios. So this is labor intensive as well. They have to dry it outside on these patios, but at night they actually rake all the beans into a pyramid and cover it to try and prevent moisture from coming underneath and causing mold and fungus. Or they have them on raised beds, and that's a sight to see. All these contraptions that almost look like sawhorses end to end with the beans just covered on top of the tarps, and then at night they cover all the beans the same thing to keep moisture at bay. And if decaf is your preference, and we just had a decaf, I've spoken to a lot of people that think there's not much difference between the solvent method and the Swiss water method. But if you're into drinking things that are more natural, and the coffee we just sampled is organic and fair trade. So this would be a way to go. You could look for coffees that have the Swiss water decaf method that uses activated charcoal to take out most of the caffeine and leaves a more natural taste. And is a better, I think it's better tasting, but some people have no problem with either type. Okay. So here's a little bit about coffee's highlights that I hope you find interesting. All these histories are so interesting, but for coffee, we start in 1723. So there was something called the Brazilian Coffee Affair. So the French Guiana's ambassador's wife had an affair with a Brazilian lieutenant. And when he left, she gave him a bouquet, but in between the bouquet were grafts of the coffee plants. So he actually took those grafts back to Brazil and started the coffee plantations. And of course, now we know that Brazil is the leader in providing the world with coffee. So that's pretty amazing. And then in 1762, coffee houses started popping up all over London. And Jonathan's was a well-known coffee house. And the coffee houses of the day were known as penny universities. And they were mercantile exchanges. Many times they were located near the seaport. So there was a lot of trade happening, exchanging of ideas. And this is where tips were invented. So tips stands for, I'm sure you know, to ensure proper service. You would leave a coin in your coffee cup, and that would ensure that you had quick service. And also Jonathan's, because of all the money exchanged at that coffee house, it actually became in the future the London Stock Exchange. So in 1773, the Boston Tea Party happened, and this surged the consumption of coffee. If you were a patriot, you were drinking coffee instead of tea. And coffee was also served in pubs in New Amsterdam and New York alongside ale. People would drink ale in the morning or coffee. And in 1862, the Bostonians, Chase and Sanborn, were known to put the first to put quality in a can, their quality roast in a can. In 1871, Arbuckle's was known as one of the largest importers of coffee. They were from New York. They were sort of masters of mass production. And in 1880, Lyons Coffee became the second largest producer of coffee. And they were purchased by this man, Alfred Woolson of Woolson Spice. And he was a master marketer. And he actually started putting trading cards in the coffee, and also put the lion's face on the coffee with a cutout, and would say, cut out the lion's head and grab your trading cards. And when you collected a certain amount, you could trade it in for different things, such as, believe it or not, supposedly a wedding ring, revolvers. It was sort of like the original S&H green stamps, which was amazing. In 1881, Hills Brothers came on the scene, and they were known for their vacuum packing of coffee, which really retained the beauty of the coffee and the fine roasting. And in 1886, in Nashville, there was a man named Joel Cheek. He was serving coffee that people loved in the local area at his hotel. And so he had such a following, he decided to market it, and he decided to name it after the hotel that he ran, which was called the Maxwell House. So that's where Maxwell House came from. In 1903, Germans created decaf, sans cafe, without caffeine. And so that became Sanka. That's where Sanka came from. In 1906, someone created, actually George C. Washington created the first instant coffee. In 1920s, especially in New York, I remember seeing that when I used to go in to see the Rockettes as a little girl, chock full of nuts on every corner in New York. Well, they started selling nuts, but then the Depression hit, and all people wanted to do was come in and sit and have a cup of coffee. That's all they could afford. So they actually fully converted over to coffee shops and made their millions in coffee. 1938, the espresso machine, Achille Gaggia, he actually perfected the first espresso machine, which actually used steam, which was considered to sometimes burn the liquid. So he created this espresso machine that created a beautiful crema. So when the shot was pulled, the espresso shot was pulled, it had a beautiful foam on top. And if you're an espresso lover, you know that the crema sort of contains the volatile oils, and that's the aromatherapy from the beans. The essential oils from the beans are under the crema. So that was beautiful. When you sort of sip the crema, then you would get a noseful of the essential oils and take in the essence of the espresso. And then in 1937 and 1942, Milton Hershey, who first became the mass marketer of milk chocolate Hershey bars in the country. He actually convinced the government to include 2 4-ounce Hershey bars in the ration kits for the soldiers, so they had a little bit of home with them when they went abroad. And also they then included in 1942 Maxwell House coffee. And in 1938, Nestle gets on the scene. And of course, Nestle created the first milk chocolate, Henri Nestle, and they freeze dry coffee, and that was Nescafe. And then finally, in 1972, we were all able to have the automatic drip, and Mr. Coffee arrives on the scene. So that's a little bit about the history and how coffee came to present day. Okay, so thank you for your attention. And we're going to have tasting number 2. So the next tasting, you have 2 squares in your bag, and please feel free to unmute, okay? Because I want to hear your feedback on this, okay? So this is our next bar of chocolate. So sometimes at in-person programs, I'll make an espresso bark. So the espresso bark that I like to do is a 72% cacao, which I really like that because it still has a little bit of sweetness to it. And then I use either crushed espresso bean, or I'll use Medaglia d'Oro dried espresso powder mixed into the chocolate, which I love, with some almonds. So this is something you can easily make at home, just melting the chocolate of your choice. As long as you consume it within a day or so, it'll start blooming if it's not tempered, but that's okay because it doesn't really affect it too much, and I'm sure you can consume it in a day. But that's one way you can make your own espresso bark, which is so beautiful with the espresso we're going to have. This is a great choice, though. I have to say, I think they make great chocolate. This is from Whole Foods. If you can see, this is endangered species. I'm sure you've seen this before. Espresso bean and dark chocolate. This too is 72%. 72%. So we're moving up the ladder. We're at 68. Now we're at 72. And this is a great company too, because this is a fair trade chocolate. So the farmers are fairly compensated, and it's a non-GMO product too, which I think is awesome. But of course, does it taste good? I think it's great, but we'll see what you think. It has a nice texture to it. So that's great when you're moving up the ladder in terms of having a darker coffee. Something darker can stand up to a heavier chocolate. So you have 2 pieces in your bag. One has lines on it, that's the lint, but the other one you're looking for, which we're going to try, has the letters ESC on it. So that's the endangered species chocolate. So does everybody have that? And is everybody ready with your brewed espresso? That's decaf espresso? Yes? Carla, how about you?
Yes, I think we're ready.
Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to taste it the same way we did before. We always want to coat our palate with the cocoa salad. So we'll see what you think. This has a little bit of texture to it, and they left it a little bit of a nice texture. So we'll see what you think. Let that melt on your tongue a bit, and then follow it up with the decaf espresso and see what you think of that. And we'll get some feedback, okay?
Yeah. Right? Are you muted?
So this is 72%. So this would mean there's a tiny bit less sugar. This would be 28% sugar content. And of course, because the espresso's in here, it might taste a little darker to you because of the ground coffee. So let's see how this tastes. I love this. Sometimes I like to swish it around my mouth, like when you taste a wine, so you can coat your whole palate. Now that's rich. What do you
Right.
think?
Very good.
I like it with the cocoa.
I like the cocoa beans.
Isn't that delicious?
Yeah. Very rich.
It's good.
And you can taste a little bit of the grit, right, of the espresso powder
Yes.
in there.
Yep.
This is a great.
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. And you're having a little bit of texture. And actually, when I make, I think I mentioned when I make the espresso bark, I like texture in chocolate. So in a bark, it's always fun to have texture. So you could actually make your espresso bark and get the chocolate covered coffee bean and crush it and put it on top of your espresso bark. And you only need a little bit. It's such a great treat. And actually, believe it or not, espresso pairs really nicely with a stronger cheese. So I know that sounds weird, but if you want to try something very interesting, you can do a aged, and I've done it at my programs, a strongly aged cheddar, like an 18-month to 2-year aged cheddar. So that has a lot of sugar present in it because it's been aged, and it pairs really nicely with these things, believe it or not. So give that a shot. Okay, so we're going to move on. I hope you enjoyed that. And so this tells a little bit about Folgers. So I love this. There once was a young man from Nantucket. So James Folger in 1850 was only 14 years old, and his two brothers decided to make their fortune in the San Francisco gold rush. And the Folger boys were from a well-known whaling clan from Nantucket, and they headed to San Francisco, but James was so young, he had to stay behind, and he was selling coffee to the miners. And his brothers didn't fare so well, but he actually worked his way up into managing, and then he actually purchased the stand that he was working at, and then proceeded to open up J.A. Folger Company. And he was well known for setting the standards of the cup tasting for quality standards, to have precise standards for every cup of coffee. So that's what he was known for. Okay, so here's a little bit about roasting. So the master roaster that I talked to actually told me that the coffee beans are roasted in a drum roaster between 300 and 450 degrees, and for different various temperatures up to 15 minutes. But he wanted me to make sure I mentioned, because every master roaster has their own style, they have their own preferred temperature, and they're trying to achieve a certain flavor. They have different stages where they sort of have the coffee yield the essential oils. So coffee has 3 stages. First, they dry the coffee a little bit further to make sure it's at the proper moisture content. And then the coffee goes through this stage called the Maillard process. So that means that the green coffee bean turns from green to this yellow hay-like color. And also, not only does it turn color, but it also emits the smell of hay. And I always remember when I was studying, I'd think, okay, I'm going to remember the Maillard method because it smells like hay or Maillard. And then on to roasting. Toward the end of the roast, the beans go through something called a first crack stage. And the first crack sounds like popcorn. It's letting the steam out. And that creates the notes. It creates the flavor notes, chocolates and caramel notes. And now it is brewable at that point, but some master roasters might want to create a French roast, a darker, richer roast, and then they'd have to go through the second crack stage, which even admits a darker roast, but it releases even more essential oils. But yet that tends to be a tad less acidic. So some people like that very rich roast. And in 1846, James Carter of Boston, he was the first to come up with the hand roaster, where he would just put it in the fire, crank it, and release it. And roasting, it's, the expertise of roasting can actually develop up to 1,000 aromatic compounds, which is pretty amazing. So here are some pictures from my programs. I wanted to show you what I bring in the pots that I've collected, which I think is pretty neat. And you may recognize some of these or use some of these. So there are many ways to brew. So on the left here, in the back is the Italian Bioletti Mocha Express. So that one is well known. It's from Italy, and it's a heavy pot, but it can produce a bitter product because it's put on the direct heat, so it can create that bitter flavor. The one in front is called a Neapolitan Lupa Cafeteria espresso pot. This is the one that my great grandmother had. She was from Italy and she didn't speak any English. And every Sunday when I was little, we would go over there and have espresso. And I think I was about 8 or 9, and everyone that sat around the table had espresso and an amaretti and a shot of anisette, everybody. And we would drink, that would be our afternoon treat. And the amaretti is, of course, if you've had it before, you know it's made with the egg whites. So it's known as amaretti di credenza, means that the cookie that can sit on the sideboard. So if the doorbell rings, Nani is ready with the cookies to go. So that's how, and that's what we called her, Nani. So that was the espresso pot, and that's an aluminum pot. Then we have in the center, we have the hand crank bean grinder. So that one is circa 1900, and I just found a mini one. I just came upon a mini one. I found it at an antique store, so that's pretty neat. It's probably single serve, I guess, but you could grind the coffee bean. But this is how coffee and chocolate cross paths. So if you were a purveyor of the coffee bean, like John Cadbury in England, maybe you could grind this newfangled thing called the cacao bean and see what you could do with it. And that's exactly what many people did, as did John Cadbury. He was selling coffees and teas, and he decided to grind the cacao bean, and he actually was creating drinking chocolates. He created a line of drinking chocolates for people, the wealthy society in England. He would make it to order, and that's how he made his millions, through drinking chocolate. And then on back to the picture on the left there, you've probably seen those before, the aluminum percolators from the 1950s. My mother had one with the coffee perking through the glass little top there. That created a very thick bitter product too. And then we have the French press. A lot of people love the French press, which you can agitate the beans and let them sit, but you're not going beyond the 4 minutes. Some people do less than that, but it gives a nice clean cup flavor. And this is a fairly new invention from 1984, the Aeropress. I love this. Both the French press and the Aeropress, you can travel with these. The French press has the mini ones you can travel with, and this Aeropress is great to take with you when you travel. It only takes 2 minutes, and it gets pressed through right directly into your cup after only steeping and extracting for 2 minutes. And it's considered less acidic than the French press. That was created by a Stanford University professor, an engineering professor. So he created that. But if you're interested, you could try that and see what you think of that. Okay. Here are a few others. The Chemex. This was created in 1941 by a German chemist. This is considered a beaker style, and it has a thicker filter that's a pour over coffee. And over here on the right, if you can see that kettle, that sort of looks like a beehive with the gooseneck. This is the kettle of choice. I never really knew about these until about 10 years ago. I love these because when you're doing pour over coffees, or this Hareo, which we'll talking about in a sec, it provides the bloom, which means when you're pouring these little tight concentric circles, you first pour a little bit of water in to saturate the grounds. And if you've ever seen in your coffee, you've ever seen it when the coffee grounds get wet, they have that iridescent look to them, the bubbles, that's the carbon dioxide being released. And that makes room for the water to really saturate the grounds, and you get like a nice extraction of the essential oils. And the center one is actually was used for cowboy coffee. And of course, believe it or not, this was used at the campfires, but true cowboy coffee was used where they would actually out on the range, they would use their sock. And I'm hoping it's not the sock from their foot, but who knows? They put the grounds in the sock and then steeped it in the sock, believe it or not. Ew. And then we have the Hareo V60, the master roaster that I dealt with. This was his favorite way to brew coffee, his all-time favorite way. So this was, or creates like an extraction of only 3 minutes, but it's got these sloped sides. You may have seen this before. Some are plastic, some are ceramic, but they create a really nice, clean extraction. So you might want to try some of these new types of brews. Okay, so we have coffee cupping. So when I was studying for these foundations, I had to do coffee cuppings, and you could do this too. It's very interesting. So if you're a coffee lover, you can grab some friends and do this. It's a fun activity. So I was sent many different coffees, and you have to weigh the coffee, have it ground to a certain amount to relate to a certain amount, a certain volume of water. And just like it reminds me of wine tasting. So basically on the left here, you have the dry coffee grounds. And then on the right, you have the coffee grounds with the water that's been steeped, and you've got the crust over it. So what happens is you steep the coffee for 8 minutes, and then you break the crust with the your spoon, which allows the volatile oils to break through. And then in another 4 minutes, just as a professional cupper would do, you would nose the brew. So you'd bend down and smell the coffee. And believe it or not, we actually taste coffee first through olfaction. Just like essential oils, we breathe it in first, and then we taste it, believe it or not. So they nose the brew, and then they move the crust aside, and they scoop a clean spoonful, and you would slurp it and spray it inside of your mouth, and then you weigh it. So this is the same as if you're at a wine tasting and you're weighing the weight of the wine. So if it's oily, or if it feels heavy, or if it's a crisp light wine, that would be the same thing. And then they spit it out and start all over again. But that's an interesting thing to try. You can easily have fun with that and learn all about different coffees. And you're visiting it at 3 different times and temperatures, just like with wine. When the wine first is chilled, it tastes different than when it's been sitting for 20 minutes and the wine opens up and the essential oils come out and the flavors sort of marry with the oxygen in the air. So it's very interesting. Both tastes of sour and bitter are present in coffee. So we first taste those when we taste coffee. Okay, we're going to have our last tasting in a minute, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about roasting again. Beans develop their natural sugars during the process. And on the right are just some different roasts you may recognize. A dark roast has cocoa notes. So the cocoa, this is why coffee pairs so beautifully with chocolate. It's very similar. It's a similar type bean, and they both start out tannic. Both natural cacao and natural coffee start out with that tannic acidic taste. So that's why they pair beautifully. And when they both roast, they have these essential oils and the sugars that are intensified. And then split roasting is interesting because they roast beans of the similar origin together, which develops the flavors. Let's say the coffee was from an area that had a lot of honeysuckle. So that would affect how the coffee would taste. And that's the same thing as single origin chocolate blends. When they take the cacao bean from the certain areas of single origin chocolate, it's the same thing. You're picking up the flavors. Okay, we're going to have tasting number 3. Okay. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the health benefits of both and why you can include these in your diet. Okay, so let's get ready for our last tasting. Okay, so the last tasting you're going to have a choice of the two, either coffee. I'm going to go with the espresso because this chocolate that we're having is 90%, 90% Lindt. Now, if you've had 90% before, you know, you may have not had Lindt. It may not be your thing, but I want you to be exposed to it because I think Lindt has a great line of darker chocolates that are not chalky. I think if you're going to work your way up to the more healthful chocolate, Lindt would be the way to go. And now they are at 95%, and they actually have a 100% chocolate in the candy aisle, not in the baking aisle, in the chocolate aisle. So that's pretty amazing. So people are even venturing into that area. So we're going to be having our 90%, which of course is only 10% sugar, 90% cocoa solids. So you're going to really taste the difference with this one because this has a lot more cocoa solids, and the cocoa should really coat your tongue. You'll be able to taste that right off the bat. And then we'll follow up. If you have the ice cream, if you decided to go with the ice cream and make the espresso and the ice cream scoop to make an affogato, this is where you want to use the espresso. Okay, that's what I do in my in-person, but if you have the ice cream, I would do that now. Okay, so I'm gonna take out my 90%. Okay. So that's the one that has the lines, okay? And please unmute yourself so I can hear any feedback. So look how dark this is. It's almost black. So you'll be able to taste it. So now let's see what happens when you let this melt on your tongue. It should be much denser on your tongue because there are more cocoa solids present. So let's see, and you can follow it up with either one of your coffees. Now, if you follow it up with the espresso, it's gonna match it, but I like it with both. We'll see what you think. So let's try that. So I want to know if you're not a fan of bittersweet, what do you think of this? It may not be your thing, but what do you think of this in terms of it's not chalky, but it's bitter, but I think it's delicious. So what do you think? True feedback.
It was my favorite of the three. And
Oh.
yeah. Oh yeah. I eat baking chocolate. I mean, I love
Oh.
But what I learned tonight from you is that probably the reason I like it so much is not only that I'm comfortable with the bitterness, but I like the denseness. I like the way it sits on my tongue, and that's new to me. So thank you.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And it's healthful for you. Okay, so let me, anybody else on that? Any other feedback? All right. So
Good.
I'm going to tell you, you like it? Okay. I'm going to tell you, I hope you do like it. And if you don't, I encourage you to consider trying this over again another time. And if you're not really into the bitterness of it, seriously, you can try it with a red wine. The sugar in the red wine will fill in for the lacking sugars in the dark chocolate, and you will get a different flavor. It's actually delicious. I mean, obviously red wine and chocolate, but I mean, that's a no-brainer. But I mean, you will taste the difference in the sugar being made up for in the wine, in the red wine. Okay.
Susan,
so
did you want to add something?
Go ahead.
Susan, I saw you unmuted for a second.
No? Okay. All right.
No, we're just enjoying all the flavors. Thank you. This is
Oh,
really interesting.
Awesome. Okay. So this is why you should include dark chocolate. So dark chocolate, they're saying over 70%, but I would say higher than that. Is the less sugar, the better, right? And I'm going to just give you a quick synopsis so you can understand how good it is for you. Okay, we're going to talk about coffee first. These are studies that have been done. It cuts type 2 diabetes risk by 35%. This is 2 cups a day. It can cut liver risk by 40%, heart disease by 20%, lowers prostate cancer risk by 60%, lowers breast cancer risk by 57%, helps with long and short-term memory, as does cacao. They've done studies with cacao through Washington State that has proven in relation to Alzheimer's that it actually helps with brain cognition. So that's only 3 times a week, and I can do that in a day. So I'm sharp as a tack 90% of the time. Okay, so dark roast is also a bit healthier, as they believe that roasting destroys a bit more of the natural toxins. Um, by drinking 3 cups a day, it is considered anti-inflammatory, and so is cacao. Cacao is totally anti-inflammatory because of the natural fats and the high magnesium content in cacao. And a lot of these are, one is a Harvard study, very high in antioxidants because it's a natural, the natural beans. Cold brew supposedly boosts our metabolism to help with our system moving along. The coffee cherry, which is the green coffee cherry that we were talking about before, that is so high on the ORAC scale, which rates the antioxidants level. It's actually higher than blueberries, believe it or not. And as far as chocolate goes, super high in magnesium. It lowers your LDL, which is your bad cholesterol, and it also is considered a food that moves blood around the body. So it's an anti-stagnation food. So this isn't milk chocolate. This is cacao that's higher in percentages. So that's why I gave you the 90% to see, you know, if you can include that in your diet, it's actually healthful. And as you get up higher in the percentages, you'll realize you don't even want a whole bar. It's satiating. Cocoa is known to be satiating in its natural powder form. It's a satiating food. Okay. So I'm running out of time, so I want to get through this so I don't forget anything. I'll just show you this picture. We all recognize the old Dunkin' D. My daughter lived in Quincy for a while, so I know it's not Quincy, it's Quincy, Mass. Bill Rosenberg started that in the 50s. This is an automated hot vending machine from 1947 for only 5 cents a cup. And we recognize this, right? I Love Lucy, the best scene ever. And that was filmed at See's Candies in LA. So See's was started by Canadians, and they are well known for their home style chocolates, and people love them. And then we can't forget about mentioning, I could go on and on about all the chocolate pioneers, but this is the number one, the chocolate we just had, Rudolph Lindt from 1879. He was not only a chocolatier, but he was the inventor of the conching machine. And we have to mention him because he changed the face of chocolate. He created this machine that had paddles that actually blended the chocolate until it was so smooth and viscous that people just couldn't get enough of it. So it turned it from sort of a gritty product. It was formerly a gritty product into something that was smooth as silk. So sales went through the roof with that. Okay.
Kim, I think someone had their hand raised. I saw Mia had her hand raised. Did you want to ask a question, Mia?
I'm sorry, go ahead. I don't see those. I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was just a comment on the health benefits of coffee, and you had mentioned LDL and cholesterol. And actually, with coffee at least, it's probably better to stick to paper filters, because there have been repeated studies now showing that coffee that's made without a paper filter can actually raise LDLs and raise LDLs and cholesterol levels.
Right, and you're right about that. Thank you for sharing. And also, that's why they recommend the untreated paper filter, which you probably know.
Right.
The non-bleached filters, the brown filters.
If you try the different filters, if you go with the Japanese filters, the Hareo filters, those are very high quality. You actually taste the difference.
Right, and many times when we use the Hareo or whatever, and I'm sure you know, if you have that, you're rinsing the filter as well.
Right.
So thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, I wanted to just mention this quickly. In 1966, Peet's Coffee was established in Berkeley. He was a Dutch American, so he had the background from the Dutch, and he shared his techniques with his 3 friends. So they got his approval, and they used his beans, and they opened their own shop called Starbucks. So then in 1982, we know Howard Schultz worked for Starbucks, the same people in Seattle, and he tried to convince those owners to copy the barista model that he saw on his trip to Milan, which they declined. And then eventually he purchased their business, Starbucks, for under 4 million, which is pretty neat. Okay, this is just a few ways that people take their coffee in cultures around the world. Of course, in Belgium with chocolate. What else? I thought this was interesting because I've made chocolate with peppercorn, so coffee with peppercorn, cinnamon from Mexico. And then I've had quite a few people that I've met along my journeys with programs, and a few have been from Denmark, and they actually said we also use the sugar cube held between our teeth sometimes. Okay, and this is a book if you would like to learn more about coffee, which I think is pretty comprehensive. The library may have it. And also it tells about the dark portion of the history of it as well, which also goes through the tea industry and the cocoa or cacao industry in terms of slavery and the mistreatment of those that worked when there was no regulation. So it covers everything. So I want to tell you, creative genius and coffee go hand in hand. So these are some people throughout history that drank a lot of coffee. So this is what the French writer de Balzac said. He loved coffee so much, he said, that everything becomes agitated. Ideas quickly march into motion like the battalions of a grand army. And then my paper just spreads with ink. I love that. Beethoven supposedly used 60 beans per 1 cup. Can you imagine? Voltaire, the satirist, he actually supposedly drank 50 cups a day, and he lived into his 80s. Teddy Roosevelt supposedly drank a gallon a day, and Johann Sebastian Bach loved coffee so much that he actually wrote the coffee cantata. So I thought that was pretty neat. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, if you give me 1 more minute, I like to end on a poem that I hope makes you smile. And I want to thank you in advance for having me. Thank you so much and for your attention. And here's my poem. So this is called Ode to Coffee. Coffee, sweet coffee, dark Java divine, you clear out the cobwebs from my sleepy mind. The first sip swiftly flows through my veins as the reveille trumpet awakens my brain. My eyes are still at half mast, so it's time to brew cup number 2, for I'm a night owl by nature, you see. The Arabica brew fires all cylinders, it's true. I actually begin stringing sentences together coherently. I head out as my thoughts do seem clearer, but then I'm startled at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I lean in closer to see a deer in headlights staring back at me. So I need backup. So I back up and brew cup number 3. Hey, late nights take their toll, but it's just how I roll when I turn it at 2 or at 3. Mornings come so much quicker requiring a caffeine elixir. It's the best part of waking up for me. At work, strong Robustas on tap, so I'm golden. I'm now muy alert and mucho emboldened. Thanks to coffee, black coffee, dark Java divine, the heavenly brew that makes my life so sublime. Then I'm back at the castle at the end of the day, where I switch up my elixirs and enjoy a fine Cabernet. Thank you for coming, everyone. Thanks for having me, Carla.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks so
Yes,
much.
thank you so much, Kim. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.